Welcome. As promised, this today where we will be looking at the cut up tarot. This is a presentation um, that I did back in October for the Denver Tarot meetup. Um, Before we get into that, a little housekeeping. I know that it's been quite a year for me, and I'm assuming that for many of you, it was also for other reasons, maybe quite a year, maybe the same reasons. But as you know, I came out as transgender this last year, and I'm in the process of transition, and that has been something that has been quite a process. And I apologize if it seems like the content on this Patreon has kind of dropped. Yes, it has. I know this. I'm very aware of this. Um, Transition's a process, and um, I don't know what assumptions are with society, but the idea that you can flick a switch and then you are someone else is not quite how it works. And really, what I'm looking at is 2 to 5 years, really. But other things can happen in the meantime. It doesn't mean I can't teach a class. It doesn't mean that I can't do this kind of stuff. But it does kind of change up how I use my time. Um, there are a lot of things to consider for myself, and so far I've been over 3 months on HRT. It's been wonderful. It's been something that I've been very grateful for. The experience has been everything I was looking for and a lot more. But that's just a little bit about what I'm going through. I do want to keep content up on Patreon. I do want to continue this, but it's going to look a lot different. I don't have the time that I did back in during the pandemic to read for most of the day. I do work a full 40-hour week job. I've had the last 2 weeks off because it's a school, which is kind of nice. But time is a little different now. Time is spent sitting in meditation and going to appointments and talking with other trans people and learning about myself, taking a lot of ritual baths, things that definitely could filter into the content here. But a lot of this is new, and a lot of this is it's changed a lot. And so if I do apologize, like if the last year things haven't, the content and say the incense and all the other things haven't really happened. I don't know if incense will ever come back. The way that the prices have shot up and the amount of it doesn't really, it's not cost effective for me to make small batches and mail out little baggies anymore. I wish it was. But I can tell you that from a magical perspective, like I'm still doing a lot of the ceremonial magic, looking into new things. Um, those probably could filter in at some point. But yeah, a lot of it's just kind of the new adjustments in my life. And I think over the pandemic, one of the things I did feel kind of cornered into was this idea of being an influencer or a content creator or something like that. And sure, I created a Patreon and I taught 3 to 4 classes a month, between ritual craft and here and everything else. But it wasn't really sustainable at that time, and this time especially. Um, and I think that uh, kind of how I'm entering this new year is that this is a new year of learning for me. And so I will be taking more classes and reading more on my own, learning new things, um, kind of taking more of a student role. And I don't mind checking in here and sharing some of that. Some of the stuff that I'm doing, updates on this cut up tarot that I'm about to share with you today. Things like that could filter in, but it's really hard to gauge it. I'm not a professional when it comes to being an influencer or a content creator. I'm very introverted. Um, And so that's kind of that's a challenge. And yeah, so if you want to stay on Patreon, I totally support that. That would be great. There will be stuff come up. I don't know what it'll be. Um, and to me, that's kind of exciting because I don't really want to say this is the only thing that I'm going to make. This is the only thing that I'm going to share with people. Um, I want it to be a little bit more open-ended. Like, um, my life has been blown open-ended, and that chaos is something that I embrace and that I cultivate in my life. Um, it's a beautiful thing for me. So, without too much more into that, let me share with you the cut up tarot presentation. Okay. All right. So tarot de Marseille and cut up technique. Again, I shared this back in October. Um, Rena at um, Denver Tarot Meetup asked me if I would present something, and this is what I came up with. This is something that I've been working on for the last 3 or so years, and so this is kind of a culmination of that. I haven't really talked too much about it. When I was doing more Instagram and before I took my 1.5 year break from social media and stuff, this was happening, and this was something that I might have shared a little bit about, like, but I was kind of keeping it more to myself because I kind of was uh, it it was something that was very personal to me, as you will kind of see. And so, but the objectives for today, I'm going to introduce the cut up techniques applied to Tarot de Marseille, provide instructions for participants to create their own deck, and encourage further experimentation. So let's start with a little bit about Tarot de Marseille. Again, this would be something that if you were really interested in it, there's a lot of information online. To start at Wikipedia, even, like, it's there, and it's a good little article. But it would give you more of an idea of it. But this is just what we need to know for today. So we're working with a tarot that was developed. These are Italian suited playing cards that were favored by the wealthy. This is 17th to 18th century France. It's often said to be inspired by the descriptions made by Ficino. Um, those occult interpretations that we get in tarot, a lot of that came from the English. They didn't have a reference for those for playing cards like this, like tarot as playing cards. Um, And so then you have this renewed interest in the Tarot de Marseille after Jodorowsky and Philippe Camoins' reimagined deck. So that's just a little bit about that. Here's what you need to know about cut up technique. Again, this could be a whole presentation in itself, but I'm just going to highlight kind of the background in it and kind of where I come into the picture with cut up technique. Um, you have the early 20th century Dadists. These were precursors to the Surrealists, and they developed a lot of really interesting techniques for making art. And one of the things was cutting up text and cutting up paintings and cutting up things and reassembling them. It As we know, a lot of art is a critique of society or a critique of the environment, and they were a product of that at that time, the turn of the century, as a lot of new technologies coming out. This was before the atom had been split. This is before the surrealists. Um, this is before the Great Depression. This is early stuff. So there was kind of this innocence to it. There was this kind of whimsy to the idea of taking artwork and destroying it, but yet creating something new out of it. There was this kind of I think one of the things with cut up technique is that it it highlights it highlights a criticism of the world where um, the feeling that um, you're being bombarded by multiple things. This is more for me in like the media age, like that there's so much information, a lot of it information that I wasn't actually seeking out, that just kind of found me, like a billboard or an ad or something like this. I'm just assaulted by these things all the time, and to put them into to context, to try to create meaning out of something like this. It's one way to do that, and there's a lot of surrealist techniques and things like that that developed over time, and even things like technologically we can do now with things that randomize. Um, it's still something to explore. It's still I think a symptom that we're dealing with, in society. But that's just the start of that. William S. Burroughs and Brian Geisen kind of took what the Dadaists and the Surrealists had started and kind of extended that into some new realms, using magnetic tape, um, and using text again to do things. Um, More of like a theory was developed with them. When you think of cut up technique, I think you automatically go to these two with that. Um, but then the other thing that to kind of figure and factor into this, and possibly, we would be including, um, is this idea of queer art theory, that there it's a lens, it's a perspective that LGBTQI people have of the world, that's interpreted. It's something that can be unifying. Again, it's a critique about things. It is kind of looking at this kind of dissected perspective of things that's been reassembled. Again, I keep going back to that whole process of um, deconstructing and then reassembling, as a way of to me making sense of the world, in a world that's very irrational and sometimes hostile. Um, so that's a little bit on cut up technique. That may be pretty heavy, but that's kind of the background of that. Now here's how I started with it during the lockdown. I've been reading tarot for almost 20 years now. And I was starting to get into some dead ends with it. I'm a professional tarot reader, and I think that burnout is a real thing. It happens when we read for people, and we're trying to help them, um, and we're trying to kind of interpret what they're going through, using symbols, and doing it. You hear a lot of stories, and you which is really fun. It's really, I love meeting new people, but it can be draining. And during the pandemic, I went to a lot of virtual readings, and so I kind of felt like I was on call a lot, and I felt like uh, it, it, it I was hearing all these stories, and they were all very um, dire, and I think we all went through a lot during that, and um, you hear a lot as a tarot reader. So there was that. Um, there was also the unrealized gender dysphoria that was starting to creep in at this time. And I had a lot of time on my hands to sit and to contemplate and to divine and to read. And I spent a lot of time um, going in and looking at everything. Um, and so that was also a factor of how this, and you'll see how that kind of plays out when it comes to gender and tarot. So what is cut up tarot? This is a dissection of the Tarot de Marseille. The reassembled cards can present new interpretations. You have new possibilities for divination, magic, contemplation, meditation. And you have two kinds of decks. You have fixed decks and you have loose decks. Um, and there might be other ways to create decks, but these are the two that I think are probably the most practical. So with a fixed deck is one that's been laminated, like the card you're seeing off to the right. This is a fixed card. So what you're looking at is the magician card in the top half, and you might be able to pick out the cut line. Below that is the bottom half of the Hierophant or Pope. And I have laminated this card, so it is permanently like this. It is a fixed card. So as you can imagine, a loose deck would be these cards cut up, but not laminated. So they're loose. So those are the cards that you can use to do exercises with, even divination. But you can kind of alternate what you're using, what you're putting together. So, say for instance, like you didn't want to you weren't putting together the Pope, the bottom half of the Pope card. Maybe it's the bottom half of the Chariot. Maybe it's the bottom half of the Devil. Like it could be any of those, and you can interchange those. That's the loose decks. Getting started. So there's, I mean, really, what I started to see with this, and I haven't talked too much about the cuts actually, but where I came into this was with these Tarot de Marseille decks. Um, as I'm doing these readings, looking at the design elements of the cards, which are a big piece of how I read. I read a lot of the physical nature of the card, like top bottom reads in factors for me, left and right, all the design elements, the implied lines and things like this, those are all important information to me in a reading. That's where my eye tracks across the spread. Those things are how I read the tarot, very visually, very much with a lot of my art background with design driving this. So Tarot de Marseille decks have this nature to them that there's a scale to them, there's a design to them, there's cohesion between the cards. I don't know if you've ever seen a tarot deck or worked with a tarot deck where as you're reading it, as you're looking through the cards, they all look kind of different. The things aren't like the colors aren't quite the same, and there isn't kind of a flow to it. Some of the figures are drawn differently. That might be clip art, it might be collage kind of stuff. Like there's all sorts of tarot decks out there, and the thing about the Tarot de Marseille that it has, as well as some other decks I've seen, is this cohesion, like the same basic colors, the same style of lines. And again, these were woodcuts, yes, so that makes a lot of sense. They were all made from the same medium, but the designer of these cards would have been maybe one or two or three people, but a lot of times it may have been just one person. And just I just think that there's a design aesthetic to Tarot de Marseille that is very unlike other tarots. And there's a lot of like I said, top, bottom, left, right. The diagonals kind of make sense, like as we'll see. Like there's a lot of um there's a there, I would throw three cards and I would look at them, and some of them would be top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. There'd be like a line that would be going horizontally across all three of them. Like, and if you look through the deck and you start to pick out these cards that have clear delineations in the card like that, like it starts to make sense. Maybe, maybe, but for me it did. Anyway, the best deck to get for this, if you're wanting to get started, would be the CBD Tarot. It's a cheaper deck. It's really well made. It's quality paper, but it's cheap because you're going to be cutting this up, and you might be cutting a couple decks up, because that's what I've done that over the past couple of years. Like take multiple decks and cut them up. Each deck is about, you could get them for about $20. Now, if you're going to use something like the Hodorovsky Cam 1 deck, that's $40. And so it's twice that. So this one works a little bit better. And even among Tarot de Marseille decks, this one has a really consistent, just a consistent deck. So that's the one thing. And then you're going to want a paper cutter or X-Acto knife. I've used paper cutters. I like those a lot better than X-Acto knives, because if you get one that's kind of one of those sliding paper cutters, it's really easy to get really fine, exact lines. Sometimes it's not maybe as sharp of a line as an X-Acto knife, but you're less likely to have some of the variants that you get with an X-Acto knife that could go over, even with a straight edge. Granted, yes, straight edge probably should be the third item you need if you're going to use the X-Acto knife, but you'll figure that out. So plan your cuts. There are three main cuts that we're going to be looking at. There's the horizontal cut, which is what I was just talking about. This is the most common, most representational, and it's the best for the major arcana. Vertical, these are top to bottom, and they're best for the minor arcana. And then finally, you have diagonal cards. And these, typically the court cards are the best ones for this, and the minor arcana. And these are the cards. The diagonal ones have a little bit, it does happen in other cards, but the diagonal ones have the most gender variance of the cards. So let's take a look. These are the three cuts. We have left to right a horizontal cut. There we have the Hanged Man and the Devil. In the middle, we have the Seven of Cups and the Nine of Cups. And then on the right, we have the Queen of Cups or Queen of Coins and the King of Coins combined. And you can see that's what I'm talking about with the diagonal cards. The shoulders don't quite match up. There are some that it's even more pronounced that they match up. But this is kind of what we're seeing, is that these cards can kind of line up. And that is the cut for the diagonal that you're going to want to make. I would not cut the other direction. I would always start from the bottom left to the top right. That cut does the best job if you're wanting to line things up. So horizontal cuts, how would you interpret this card? So this is where we kind of think about, okay, so we're going to go by cuts, but we're going to start with these horizontal cuts. How would you interpret this card? This is a fixed card. It could be a loose card. You could have compiled these two. You could have done that by chance. You could have done that in in trance work or in like some very focused ritual work. You could do this before ritual as a way of combining the two energies of these cards. But leading up to that, how would you interpret this card? Is it a combination of the imagery? Is it a combination of the High Priestess and the Hermit? Or is it something else? it, like as we can see here with those lines and how they're lining up, you can see how her arm and shoulder and elbow really line up there, and that kind of it's a very interesting little mashup. But anyway, so are there other things to consider when interpreting these cut-ups? The colors, what's going on at the line where things are connecting, because that's often the area of the card that's the strangest, because it's two cards that have been cut and half of each of them have been put back together. The area where these two cuts meet, that's going to have some pretty strange or interesting things, whether it's hands going into coat pockets or three hands appearing out of a sleeve. You get all sorts of things that are happening. Would you be interpreting those two? How would you interpret things like three hands coming out of a sleeve? There are things to think about. So here's some more examples of some horizontal cuts. You can see when I cut the Fool and the Death card that they have a very similar body posture. It doesn't match up very well here, but if you look at the two cards very closely together, they are in many ways reflecting each other. Then we have the Chariot and the Justice card, which is a very interesting little mashup. And then the Devil and the Hanged Man too. If at any point you definitely hit pause, like if you want to look at more of these, we have several slides of these cards coming up. Feel free to pause if you want to take a look at those more. But here we have some more. We have the Lovers and the Judgment card combined, making a very interesting little combo there. The Sun and Judgment, and the Chariot and the Magician. You can see that's a pretty neat mashup there. These are all loose cards. And so what's really kind of interesting about it is, like, let's take a look at maybe like the Judgment card and the Sun in the middle there. I think about revelations with the Judgment card, things revealing themselves, aha moments. And then we have the Sun, which to me is camaraderie and friendship. And so it's kind of this revelation of friendship. It could be a recognition of that. It could be you and a partner figuring something out together. That partner could be romantic, it could be friendship, it could be business, but either way, like there's some like benevolence being showered upon these two folks. So looking at some other ones, the Devil and the Hanged Man, like and some of these other ones, like there's so many different combinations of them, and they're all really fun. But those top bottom, the horizontal cuts, they have a lot going for them. There we have the Sun and the Star, the Tower and the Judgment card combined. Some of them don't have to make sense. It's not maybe all the time about things making sense and lining up. It could just be about what the cards are saying. Here we have some more horizontal cuts. I think it's interesting that the High Priestess and the Emperor having a pretty nice mashup there. Some more. This is the Temperance card as a bartender with the Chariot. I thought that was a really fun little combo. Judgment and the Moon, and then the Devil as the Magician. Here's some more. The Pope and the Hanged Man. In the middle there, that's the Sun, the Moon, and the Star combined. Yeah, we had that one. So, okay, and so here now let's take a look at some minor arcana cards. These are the kinds of things you're going to get with this. Again, some of them are going to make sense. Some of them are going to have design elements that have continuity between the two halves, and some are going to seem a little bit more absurd. You can see that those wands on the far right, they make for a pretty good design cutout. It's kind of interesting with the two of cups and that two of coins, how that line from the base of the flower, the bottom goes in and becomes that coin. That's a really nice line implied there. So vertical cuts, let's take a look at some vertical cuts. So from this card here, we have that 9 of cups and the 7 of cups combined. What could we interpret from this card? How could we use vertical cards in tarot spreads? So interpreting these cards, especially these minor arcana cards, it's kind of something to consider. Are you for these cups that are meeting at the middle there, are they 1 cup? Are they half a cup? What is that? Is it a combined energy of this? Is it a before and after? Before and after is something that can factor into these vertical cut cards because you have 2 clear halves. And we typically read these cards from left to right. And so those can be almost a before, after, first, then kind of situation. Here's some more. Swords are great. Swords line up really well. If you have a Tarot de Marseille and haven't lined up all your swords in a row from the 2 to the 10, it's pretty interesting. You should do it. And that's before you cut them. That's just as they are. But then you have these other things like that. Would have been the 5 of coins and the 9 of cups combined. You can talk about the merging of 2 elements and how their interaction might influence a reading and the interpretation of a card. Here are the aces. Here's some aces combined. This is what they look like. Kind of some interesting things with that. You could think of this maybe as alchemical, but we can divide some of these cards top, bottom like that. And then you can see in some of them that the words sometimes that are created by these cut-ups, like here, here, there are things like that that happen too. So diagonal cuts, and so these are the ones that are all going from the bottom left to the upper right. And again, I said court cards are going to get the best results for this. And then minor arcana can be effective too. But we're probably going to work mostly with those court cards because we'll see how well they do. Like this King of Swords, Queen of Coins there on the left. Those 2 combined, that's a nice thing. Then we have minor or major arcana cards like the Wheel of Fortune and the Tower combined. Go back. So here's some of the gender bending that happens with these when you combine the kings and queens. You have, like, here we have the Queen of Swords and the King of Swords combined. Shoulders are pretty closely matched. You wouldn't necessarily have to combine them by their suits. You could cross suits too. But you're kind of seeing how that's the cut. Most of the things are kind of, it's almost like the tools and things are kind of situated off to the upper left, or maybe in some cases the lower right. And that's why that cut becomes so important. You can see more of that here. So again, the knights sometimes can match up pretty nicely. I did kind of like, because I had cut up a devil card in another deck. It is kind of interesting to play around with some of the other things like this, or it was a death card and the Knight of Wands combined there. Okay, here's some more from a loose deck. That Queen and King of Wands is really nice. I liked how that one turned out. You can see like towards that line, like it's where you get some really interesting things, like the legs and the arms and hands and things. These are more diagonal cuts. Okay. So now using your cut up deck, after you've made all your cuts, you can use it for a lot of different things. And going forward, these will be the things that we'll discuss if I make future videos. I do plan to do things with this and develop it more. But with divination, you can create your own deck of either laminated or you can keep them loose, and you could draw out the pieces or the fixed cards and use those in readings. Using things for meditation, visualizing the cards that are before you. Using with candle magic, I have always been someone to use tarot decks in magic and just cut them up, burn them, write on them. I typically will have a couple burner decks that I'm working with that I will be using magically and not for divination, usually cheaper decks. Ritual, reassembled cards can be integrated into ceremony. If you're familiar with things like some of the Golden Dawn or Thelemic curriculum with working with tarot cards and ritual, applying these cards in there too. Talismanic use, sewing the cards together as packets, charging them as things. Those things can also be done with these, just like regular tarot cards. Now, all right, here are my sources for this. These were three of the main books that I was using for this. As things go on, more sources will probably be added to this. But the Marseille Tarot Revealed by Yoav Ben-Dov. Ben-Dov was Jodorowsky's teacher. He has a really interesting way of presenting the Marseille, just like Jodorowsky does. They're similar because they work together, but there are differences. And it's nice to have both kind of perspectives for that, because you really can get a fuller scope of the tarot. And then Professor Charles Porterfield's book, A Deck of Spells. This is a really nice one. This was how the way that he uses playing cards in magic and ritual is very interesting and very informed by a lot of his traditions, and he shares a lot of that. And that is a good book as well. So thank you. Okay. So that was the Cut Up Tarot. I hope you enjoyed that. Look for more stuff. I know that like life has been pretty all around for me, but I do want to keep this website up with my Patreon. Keep putting stuff on, maybe just little check-ins like this with a little magical thing. But yeah, we'll see. Anyway, well, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure, and best wishes in the new year with all you do, and stay in touch.